Hi everyone, it's Henry here. If I had to pick my absolute favourite thing about being in the Warhammer hobby, or what army I'd always want to collect if I could only do one, it always for me comes back to Chaos, and whether that's in 40k, whether that's in Age of Sigmar, whether that's in the old world, there's just something about it. I love the artwork, I love the whole vibe about it, and the miniatures have always, for me, been the best of the bunch of their era. And I feel like it's going that way again with the Chaos Marine release and that upcoming Slaves to Darkness stuff that we've seen for Sigmar. So when Games Workshop sent us through a box of the new Possessed Marines, I just really wanted to paint them. I've no intentions of doing an army with them, and I don't have a ton of time, but I love these models. So this little project just needed to be pure fun. And I thought I'd film it anyway because it's fun to share stuff, right? But this isn't going to be a typical tutorial like I've done a lot of the time with the army painting series. When it comes to relaxing and happy painting, for me, a lot of the time that's going to involve oil paints, and they're going to feature quite heavily in this. And I just want to try and invoke a bit of the vibe that I get from looking at that amazing new front cover art from the Chaos Marine Codex. So let's paint. First up, over a black undercoat, I sprayed the model with Vallejo Model Colour Black, just to give me a nice black base coat to work from. Then for the first highlight, I've picked Scale 75 Petroleum Grey. This is a slightly purple grey, and that's purple, I think, is probably the colour I'm going to try and bring in a little bit in a subtle way across most of the models. With regards to where I'm placing the highlights, I'm keeping it fairly simple. It's more than just a zenithal, but really I'm just hitting the centre of the panels from a direction just to give a bit of interest to them. I'm spraying at about 25 psi, 25 to 30 psi. I'm using our Harder & Steenbeck Evolution, and that's got a 0.4mm needle and nozzle in it. And I'm working on the 5 new Possessed Marines along with the 2 grey to Possess that we got a few years back in the Shadowspear box because they're exactly the same size. And I'm working on them together as much as I can because I'd love to have this little unit done, even if it's just to use in kill team games or some narrative games. So certainly in the first half of the video, I'm going to be doing quite a lot of painting across various models, and then we'll trim it down towards the end. Now for the second highlight, I've added in some Rakarth Flesh by Games Workshop into that Petroleum Grey. I don't know the exact ratio, and because I was painting these guys at the same time together, I haven't really bothered looking at it, but you can see in the cup the colour that we're going for. It's just to lighten it up, but also keep that purple vibe going. And this time I'm going to spray into the same areas, but try and cover slightly fewer of it. I was really chuffed when I saw that the Greater Possessed were the same size as these guys because it gives you just that slightly bigger squad. And I'm also quite tempted to do that Forge World Argyle Tau model to add into them as well. I say this is not an army project, and it isn't, I don't think, but I do love the Possessed and I do love all the cultist stuff that we've seen. So I think Necromunda and Kill Team for me might be a way to explore Chaos for a little while. But there's a very good chance this time next year, I think, I think there might be time for a, what do we call them now? Heretic Astartes force. They're just amazing models. If you love Chaos, I just pick them up. They're an absolute joy to build. And I'm just gonna have fun painting them. Now, one of the things obviously you can see on them is there is a lot of detail, and I'm going to get over that by basically not painting all of it. Now, for the fleshy parts, I'm taking Rakarth Flesh, thinned it fairly heavily so it goes to the airbrush, and then added in a few drops of this Drain Life by Scale 75, their instant colour range. And by ignoring some of the detail and using my airbrush where possible, it should speed the process up. And here I'm just hitting all the areas of the mutated flesh. Now, if I get a tiny bit of overspray, I'm not too fussed. but I am trying to be really careful. Generally, there's trim in the way, so that's going to avoid overspray onto the panels. But also, obviously, there's certain panels where the armour just blends straight into the flesh anyway, so a little bit of overspray there is fine because it just creates a natural transition between the two. But it's very much a case of taking my time to build this up. I think if you wanted to take, you know, a month or two to paint this unit, you could create some absolute stunners. I don't. I have basically a day. Well, 2 days. So I'm just going to get what I can done with them. Because I'd just love to have them painted on the shelf, you know. And something that we go on about a fair bit is sometimes, you know, finished is better than perfect. And I'd much rather have these painted in a cool way, even if not to the best of my ability, than sat in a box in a drawer. As you can see, we're still staying within that purple sort of wheelhouse. And then once I've done all of them, I go back to the start and I add some more layers of exactly the same paint, exactly the same colour, and just building it up. You can see, even though we're going over black, we can get a really strong colour anyway. As soon as you start adding like off-whites paint in, the coverage just goes through the roof when you're airbrushing, and hairy brushing, to be fair. So you can see the difference. One on the left's just had the one pass, the one on the right is where we went back and did it. Oh, off they go. Now, to add a little bit more colour and just tidy up some of the shadows, I've taken another Scale 75 instant colour. This one's called Dead Flesh, sort of a grey purple. And really, I'm just going to spray the model from underneath. I'll be a little bit more directional if one of the limbs is facing a certain way, but generally this is a turn it upside down and spray it from underneath. Such nice big models to work on as well. You saw at the very beginning next to the Terminators, they're enormous. I had a Galvor back army for Heresy years ago. I painted up as Alpha Legion, but it was so fun having these larger marine models to play with, because not only did they look imposing, but they also, like, they were good as well. They fought like Marines who felt Marines should fight. Now I've taken the pure Drain Life, and I'm just going to hit any sort of really obvious tentacly tubey bits, just to add a little bit of variety in. But that orange works quite nice against the purple that we've got on the rest of the model. So purple, orange and green are sort of the three I'm going to play around with. And we know they work well, but also we can just look at the front cover of the Codex and you can see that they work well together. Now I'm going to do a bit on the base at this point. Nice and simple. It's sort of a very simple version of what I did a few years ago on the Necromunda basing, but we're just spraying a grey on initially. I just want to say thanks for not only clicking on this video, but hopefully if you're liking it, hitting like and subscribe, but also to those of you that are supporting us over on Patreon. You're allowing us to produce 2 to 3 videos a week at the moment across the 2 platforms. We're being able to bring in other painters and sculptors like Baz to do tutorials for you as well. It's absolutely brilliant, and we can't thank you enough for it. We're very, very excited to keep growing, and it's only with your support that we're able to do that. Now the second part of the base, I've just added a bit of Rakarth Flesh into that grey. I use Dark Sea Grey, so again, it's slightly bluey purple grey. And here I'm just going to sort of spray in the middle like a spotlight, which I've helpfully done pretty much off camera on all of them, which is really annoying, so I'm sorry about that. But you'll see what I'm on about. It's really not complicated. Just hit around the middle of the base or around their feet as if you're shining a spotlight on them. It's all very stylistic. All this painting on them, as I said, there's no real goal, there's no real consistent techniques or styles or anything. This is just happy painting, and and just have a bit of fun. And now I'm dry brushing Rakarth Flesh over the bases to pick out the edges. So you notice I'm using Rakarth Flesh to do all of my highlights with, whether that's mixing in or whether that's using it on its own. You just may as well. You know, when we're painting in this way, there's no value in me using 1,000 different paints, right? Still get the feeling across using it. And because it's that purple and it's in everything, you do get a little bit of harmony across the model as well. So there's nothing wrong with applying a little bit of that colour theory and everything, even when it's a sort of a fairly quick paint job like this. Now for the gold trim, this is inevitably the longest part, as it is on any Chaos model. I've just used scale 75 Necro Gold. And for any of the silver parts, I've used Exhaust Manifold by Watercolour series, partly because I really like the colour, but also it flows so well. It's brilliant for doing textured bits of metal, so like chainmail, like the chains hanging down here. It's not fab, I don't think, for doing trim or flatter panels, but for when you've got bobbly bits of metal, it's brilliant. Now I'm going to do a nice heavy oil wash up here for the model, and I've taken black and a brown, black and bitume in this case by Abtalung 502, but it really doesn't matter, just a black and a brown, so I'm making a dark brown wash up. Then I'm going to add in some mineral spirits, and I want this to be a thick wash, so this would be thicker than, you know, your typical Nuln oil or something like that you'd open up. You know, when you apply it, you almost don't want to see through it, but you still want it wet enough that it's flowing around the model. And this is partly so we can do a little bit of that sort of reductive style of painting where we remove a bit of it, but also just because it's going to bring a ton of definition and separation into the model, which it's really lacking at the moment. So I'm just going to get it all over the armoured parts of the models. We don't need to do any varnishing or anything like that. As long as the paint is dry before we apply this, we're not going to have any problems. And there's so much detail on these models. Like if you tried to paint them properly, I'd go mad. And then I've left it about 30 minutes here. And I've just taken a cotton bud with a little bit of the mineral spirits on, so it's not sopping wet, just a little bit damp. I'm just very, very gently just wiping it over some of the edges, some of the flat surfaces, just to remove a little bit of that wash and reveal the paint that's underneath. But again, I'm not going true reductive with it. I'm not going to go in there and do loads of work on bringing it back in. It's just a little bit here. It's just to act as a heavy wash. And this is just to tidy up the work I've done, rather than using it as a deliberate technique. I'm doing a bit more of the sort of reductive and not just reductive but grimdark painting as well over on Patreon at the moment. It's the plan for the next sort of 6 months or so, so I'm really looking forward to that. Now I've got a load more oil paints. I've got a green, a red, a sort of green-brown colour, blue and a black. And now I'm just going to start splodging them on the model and just creating some nice colours and nice effects. So I apply the paint more or less undiluted, and then I dip my brush in the little pot of thinner that I've got, and I just start working it across the model. The red is Coagulated Blood by Abtalung 502. Just if you want to know, it's olive green, industrial earth, midnight blue. But it's the colours that matter. Now I've added a little bit of green, get this octopusy tentacle thing done. So all the time just applying it, and then if it's too dilute, then I'll work on another bit, go back with some neat paint, thicken it up. If it's too thick, then I just add a bit of thinner on my brush and work it on the model, rather than creating washes and stuff prior. And partly this is just nice and quick, but it also means you end up getting little mixes of colour on the model. Looks nice and organic and interesting. This is how I painted when I first got back in the hobby. So it's really fun to just go back and do a little bit of this. I did a big Nurgle army, very similar to this, about 10 years ago. Really good fun. So now I've added a little bit of the neat blue, and blue I've mentioned in other videos is so powerful. Let's just add a little bit of that in, and then using some thinners, start to blend it into the red so we get a nice bit of purple going on. Bit more red. You can always go backwards and forwards, backwards and forwards. And it all looks super messy till you get quite near the end, so don't worry about that. But as I said earlier, for me, this is the most relaxing way of painting. Sort of colouring in and just having a bit of fun, being a bit loose with it all. And I've mixed that red and purple together on the palette slightly. Red and blue rather, to give me the purple. Particularly ones like this guy where there's so much of the flesh on show. I thought this would give a really nice, creepy sort of flesh colour. But if you're on the fence about playing around with oils, I'd really recommend you have a go and pick a demon model or something like that, because they're great to play around with oils on, because there's not really any rules. And sorry if I sound a bit funny in this video, I bit my tongue last night and it's swollen right up, so I'm very conscious of that too. So this is it when the oil's sort of dried. Looking pretty good. It's not quite dry on the claw there, you can see there's a little bit of sheen. But also where we've got tentacles and piping going into where the metal's mutated, I've painted the metal still in the metal colour, but then sort of added a bit of that oil in. And now I'm just going in with the a dry brush. So I've cleaned it off in the mineral spirits and I've dried it off on some kitchen towel. And I'm just using a dry brush here to sort of blend the paint on the model a little bit more. I'd actually been better off getting one of my old natural hair brushes that I use for oil paints to do this with. The synthetic one, as you can see, it's just splayed out too much really. I get a nicer, softer blend if I use one of the old natural hair ones. I love how the flesh came out on his feet. It's really annoying. I mean, it's nice that it's happened, but obviously, it's annoying that it's in a bit that perhaps isn't that prominent. And here I'm just applying a bit of the undiluted red paint, just up into those areas where sort of the flesh is breaking out from the armour. But yeah, go grab a box of demon models, plague bearers or something like that. Grab a few oils and just have a bit of fun with it. I think I'm certainly, for my personal painting, going to be leaning back into oil paints. Now for the various bones and horns, and there are a lot of them on these models, some of them I'm leaving black, some of them, as I say, I've painted in the metal colours, so the gold or the silver, but I think it's nice to do some of them in that sort of more traditional bone or horn colour. So I'm basing it using US Olive Drab, which is sort of brown colour, and then I'm mixing in Rakarth Flesh to create the highlights. So a roughly 50-50 mix for the first highlight, and then more or less pure Rakarth Flesh for the final highlight on them. We're getting towards the end of the model now, so I am being a little bit more accurate with what I'm doing. Although it's sort of free and loose and relaxing, I don't really want it to look sloppy, so it's a little bit of time. I didn't film it, but on any cloth that was on there, I just took what had already happened with the natural overspray, and then I added a little Rakarth Flesh into some black and just did a few little scratches along the edges, sort of edge highlight it. Now for the gold, I've mixed in a scale 75 Peridot Alchemy into the Necro Gold, so it's roughly 50-50, maybe a little bit more of the Peridot Alchemy. I'm just going to paint in a few highlights, focusing sort of on the edges, and because the oil has given our metals quite a dull finish, this metallic paint will really pop. Now it's worth saying on this video I did give the model a quick varnish after I'd done the oils, and that was simply because I wanted to get on with painting it. If I hadn't been painting it for filming, I'd have just left it sort of overnight, and then I'd have confident go back in and be able to paint over where the oil was anyway, because the oil should predominantly be in the recesses, and we're painting on the sort of highlights here on the edges. Now for the eyes, nothing too complicated here, just nice and gimmicky, sort of slight glow. I've taken Mephiston Red, thinned it a little bit down so it's not quite a wash, but it's a very thin paint, and then I'm going to paint the eyes in, and I want that red to pool, as it were, in the recess around the eye lens. Then I've mixed in a little of the Chimera Cold Yellow. Any nice sort of cold yellow will do. Mix that into the red, and I start to paint the lens itself, so leaving the recess the darker red. And I just keep adding in more and more of the yellow, working towards the centre of the lens, and you just create a really simple glowy effect. Again, we could be far more accurate and precise and all of that, but I think it sells it fine. And certainly when they're sat on the desk, they look cool. So when they're, you know, at the gaming club, in the Zone Mortalis table, under those lights, they should look pretty good. And here's the two of them that I've ended up finishing up for the video. The rest are all in various states along the way. So I really hope I can work on them over the next few weeks in the evenings. Now I'm going to grab a product called Wet Effects. You could do something very similar with gloss varnish. And I'm just going to apply this to the tentacles, maybe some of those areas where the flesh is bursting out from the armour. And it's not it gives a sort of damp look when it's dried. It doesn't give you like that super shiny thing that you'll get with gloss varnish, but it certainly gives us a nice finish. And this is something I love doing when I'm doing sort of grimdark, if you want to call it that, style painting, is playing around with the different finishes. So gloss, matte, metal, you know, it's fun. Now I've got just a brown oil wash here. This is shadow brown, but burnt umber, whatever, be fine. And I'm just washing that in over any of the piping or anywhere where I think just needs a bit sort of dirt, and then I'll wash it all over the base. Love these Zone Mortalis bases. It's a bit annoying that you're going to get these 40mm ones if you buy a flipping box of about 50 with all the others. So I bought 2 boxes of them just for these guys. So I need to figure out what to do. I might have to paint a lot of Necromunda or something. Now, something else I've gone in and done here is the old Yoo-hoo glue sort of slime, saliva goop. You can see they're on his claw technique. I'll link up. I did a video on this using a squig a while back. So take a bit more time because I'm conscious this is already a fairly long video. And final thing, you've got to have a bit of blood. So taking blood for the blood god, get a nice thick bit and a bit more of the normal stuff, and then I'll add in a bit of Nuln Oil as well, or a dark blue wash would work well too. I used to use Minotaur paints, but they've all dried up, so I'm using these now. And just mix them in, so I've got a bit where it's really dark, and then a bit more of the bright arterial stuff. And then I forgot to press record, which was great, seeing as it went really well. A lot of fun. So yeah, I'll take this guy who you can see I've already done it on, and I'll do a bit more on him. That really sucked when that happened. But it's not complicated. I'm going to load my brush up, my hairy brush up with the mix, and then I will take my airbrush and I will simply blast it against it and create these things. If you haven't got the airbrush, you can just flick it. But there we go. It actually worked quite well. Going back in and adding the pure red was nice over the top of the darker gore stuff. I think it's worked pretty well. And I just love how these models have come out. I know they're not, you know, nothing groundbreaking, but it's exactly the vibe I like. You know, I've learned a lot over the years, but it's kind of nice to paint stuff like I used to, as it were. As I said, just happy painting. Sometimes that's all the hobby really needs to be. So I hope you've enjoyed this slightly different video. Sort of seeing me do it like this. I will really endeavour to get the squad finished. And when I do, I will pop a picture up on our socials, show you what's going on with it all. But I hope you've enjoyed the video. And you can maybe apply some of this to your army projects. You know, it's a lot of techniques really. There's no skill. It's just flinging some paint at the model really. But there's certainly bits here that I'm going to use in my upcoming Slave to Darkness army, and hopefully you can in your projects as well. If you've got any questions, pop them down in the comments. I'll do my best to get back to you. Hit the like button if you haven't already, and hit subscribe, and the little notifications bell to let you know when our next videos are coming up. Thanks ever so much for watching, and I'll see you soon.